People want to easily ask, on what grounds can a defection be rejected by a party?
Well, the Constitution is clear on that. When there's no satisfactory evidence, yes, it should be rejected, except that, the determination of that satisfactory evidence is determined by them. I don't know by what standard. They will say this is, if they want to go by the Supreme Court standard that says there's a total meltdown. Now, let us imagine there's a total meltdown in the party. Okay, that to you and me, or to the Supreme Court and to most lawyers, will be, well, that standard is already met, which is just one standard. But yet, when it goes to the House is now sitting down there, not looking at only what is happening outside there, but what is happening within itself, to make a determination of the sufficiency of that evidence, even though the Supreme Court has ruled that, well, we have a total meltdown. That is what is envisaged in that provision that says satisfactory to the House or to the Senate or to that assembly. So that House will now look internally and look at what is going on, how the defection is going to affect its own function, and then determine its functionality issue. And that is why in other places it's referred to as a political question outside of the knowledge of lawyers or the knowledge of the court, but within that little assembly and its power to actually rule itself. Now, they're going to put it into vote. The majority will not vote against itself unless you have a total meltdown within that House. It's an instance where the majority will vote itself out of power.
Okay, Ajuri has a question for you in Abuja. Ajuri, please go ahead.
Barrister Sobo, you've raised quite a few issues, but the one I really want to zero in on with this question is, you know, when you talk about the power that is reposed in the presiding leadership of the two chambers, depending on the case, in Section 68, subsection 2, that they shall give effect to. Is it not an open door to selectivity when we talk about the rule of law? Because you said something to the effect that they're going to protect their territory. Now, what is that territory? Is the territory APC or PDP, or is it that is the oath of office not to the Federal Republic of Nigeria? Because if it was to the Federal Republic of Nigeria, we would like to think that where the law states something and where the law is violated, that the presiding officer, regardless of party, would do the right thing. That's not exactly what you're saying is happening. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying. And I'm saying that so long as you have that provision that puts the power of determination within a house, whether you take an oath or not is actually irrelevant. What is relevant is that is the law. And the law gives the power to the House leadership or the Senate to make the determination of sufficiency of that evidence. And if the Supreme Court rules, again, you're looking at two aspects. One is the substantive part. The other part is the procedural part. The procedural part is what the House or the Senate will determine. The Supreme Court will determine the substantive part, which the Supreme Court has said, well, there's a total meltdown, then you can defect, so on and so forth. But again, you are saying the rule of law. What is the rule of law? The rule of law is to follow what the Constitution says. And what the Constitution says now is, hey, you will make that determination. So, and that determination does not, it's not extrinsic, it's intrinsic. Now, if you compare that to the recall provision, which is H, subsection H, you will see there that it says INEC will present a certificate of return that there's been a recall. That one cannot be overcome by the leadership of the House, because even though you look at it as an extrinsic evidence, but you cannot say, well, the people have not determined. The people who put you there have determined that you have to go, which is different. That is, again, keyword, the satisfactory evidence, keyword, political question within the House. And again, I'm saying, if you will imagine a situation where you have a huge defection to the extent that it affects the work, I'm not making an argument to protect APC or to protect PDP, no. I'm just looking at the wordings of the Constitution, period. At some time, when the Supreme Court will now interpret satisfactory to mean certain things, would set a standard for that, yes, then the House will go by that standard.
Barrister Sobo, let me just follow up on that question.
Yes.
Because you know, when you look at, you're referring to Section 68, subsection 2, as giving this indication that it's the House that determines the case or determines the evidence or whatever the case may be. But my understanding of it is that it shall give effect to whatever that interpretation would be by the court of law. Even by Speaker Dogare's admission, we must, he said, and I quote, "We must allow the judiciary to do its work." Now, in the case of the Labour Party versus Ifedayo Abegunde, the Supreme Court made a very clear judgment on this issue. Is it not that they're going to give effect to the Supreme Court judgment, or is it that they interpret? Who interprets, really?
I think you're looking at it partially, not holistically, because you cannot read that you can't read the give effect in isolation without looking at the satisfactory evidence. It says it shall give effect to that declaration of vacancy based on evidence satisfactory to it. If you take away satisfactory, then your argument will be okay. It will be valid. But you have to look at those two words: give effect based on evidence that is satisfactory to it. So it does not give the power of determining the sufficiency of that evidence to anyone outside of that chamber. It gives to the chamber, not even the leadership. It says the speaker or a member. So at the end of the day, it's going to go to a vote. Okay. It's just compare it with the House just passing a law.
So if there was something that should be done, I mean, to that part of the Constitution, in the face of amending the Constitution now, what would you think should be, especially as regards safeguarding democracy in Section
1? You can look at it in two ways. It depends on the stage of democracy. If we have a democracy now that is well entrenched and that has been tested through time, you can say, well, you don't even need that provision. Let people cross-cabinet if they want, especially if you have ideological differences between the two parties. Here we don't have that ideological differences. And the democracy is so nascent, is still in the formative years, still, even though we've been there for what is almost 20 years or so, but it's still forming itself. So you have to have some sort of provision against defection that will cause massive disruption to democracy itself. I think my personal opinion is actually anti-democratic to prevent people from cross-capiting. Because they can look at it and say, well, this party is not doing well enough for me, and it's not serving my constituents, so I can move. But again, you have to look at that within, like in the United States, you can cross-capitate any which way you want. And you know the constituents, the voters will hold you accountable. We are not at that stage yet. And I'm not making an argument for anti-democratic provisions, but we do need something that sets a standard for. I probably will not go as far as say satisfactory evidence, evidence satisfactory to the House, but I'll probably put something in there to make that subject to probably the determination of the people who voted for this. You have the recall provision, but it's so difficult here. So,
Muyiwa Sobo, we want to thank you so much indeed for sharing your thoughts with us on this very developing scenario in the political space. Thank you so much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you, and Merry Christmas to you.